for Jesus. Because this is battle that's raging on all around us. It's a fight that's as ancient as the world itself, the war between good and evil. God, in this war, has made a way to life and to him through Jesus Christ. In verse 21 of Paul's writing, Paul said, "For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ." The forgiveness of sin has been purchased by the death of Christ. It's available to everyone who will receive it. Just receive it. And the way that they will know of this gift from God, the way that people in our world are going to know about this gift from God is, guess what? What is that way? Through you. Through you. It's your speaking of Christ to them. Again, no pressure at all, right? No, we got this. We've got this. Verse 19, Paul says, "For God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And he gave us," I want you to put the word "me," and say it after me. "And he gave me this wonderful message of reconciliation." That is what that text says. You speak for Jesus. But do we as Christians see ourselves as that kind of ambassador? Do we see the church, the congregation that maybe we have here today, the Gilmanton Community Church, do we see the church as an outpost of God's love and justice in this world, in a territory that is otherwise hostile or at least very indifferent to the faith and the good news? Do we see ourselves as people who are bringing that good news to this world? I mean, if you think of it, our congregation, our church family, our place here, this church building even, is like an embassy of heaven. It's like a little bit of heaven in this world. You walk through the doors into this place and you're leaving the United States of America, and even the world behind, you're coming into a little piece of heaven within these walls, and especially within the walls of our lives, within who we are as a church family. Different laws apply. The law of love rules in a place like this, not the law of coercion or the law of justice, not the laws of might makes right, the strength is the ruling force, or look out for number one. That's not the rule and the law that is predominant here in this church, in any church really. This is the church at its best anyway. Not every church lives up to this ideal, I know. And no church lives up to it all the time, including ours. Church, we're a bunch of human people after all, and all churches have more than our share of faults and foibles and quirks and all that good stuff as well. But being an ambassador for Christ is who we are. It's what we are. And to be honest, if we're honest with ourselves, be honest with yourself, it's hardly the job description that most Christians imagine for themselves. We believe, we trust, but to be an ambassador for Christ, it's hard for us to imagine that is our calling. But we surely are ambassadors for Christ. Verse 17 of our text. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ, anyone here belong to Christ, by the way? Yeah. This is you. Anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone. A new life has begun, and part of that life is being an ambassador. It is. We come and go in our movings, our in and outs. We go between the church community and the world outside the walls of the church here. We travel freely into the world, rubbing elbows with Christians and non-Christians alike. Everywhere we go, we can expect to be viewed as Christ's ambassador. Everywhere. whether we like it or not. That's who we are. Here's a frightening thought. Ready? Here's a frightening thought. The only way that some people will experience the love of God is if disciples like us demonstrate it to them. That should make us think, at the very least. That should create some sort of an intensity in us, realizing, whoa, the only way that fill in the blank, who is that person in your life that needs God's love? You know who that is. You know who it is. Perhaps the only way that that person is going to experience God's love is through you. Psst. That's why they're in your life. Right? That's why they're there. Not so that you can pray that someone else would come. God, send someone to show them your love. And God's like, well, there you are. It's you. You're the ambassador. The words of an old hymn say it so well. The words of an old hymn say this: Christ has no hands but our hands to do his work each day. He has no feet but our feet to lead people in his way. He has no tongues but our tongues to tell people how he died. He has no help but our help to bring them to his side. That's the way God designed it. He designed it so that we are part of this, an integral part of what God is doing in this earth today. The work of being an ambassador for Christ is crucially important. And in this culture of ours, which is increasingly unchurched, if you haven't noticed, and at times even resistant to the Christian faith, what we do or what we fail to do in our human interactions with people can make all the difference. You've all heard of the well-known story about Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi was a man who led India to independence from the British Empire a long, long time ago, way back in the early part of the last century. Well, he gained this independence because he was a man of deep ethical principle. He led his people because he had a deep ethical principle. When Gandhi was a young man living in London, studying to be a lawyer, he became fascinated with Jesus. And here's this Hindu man living in London, hearing about this Jesus, and he became fascinated with Jesus. And once Gandhi told a friend how he had read the New Testament of the Bible, and he discovered that Jesus' command to turn the other cheek, you know that one. He read that, and he discovered that command to turn the other cheek was amazing, and it became the foundation for his principle of nonviolent resistance. This is Gandhi speaking. A friend of his came to him around that time, and he said to Gandhi, then tell me, if you admire Christ so much, why don't you become a Christian? And Gandhi is said to have replied with a twinkle in his eye. He said, when I meet a Christian who is a follower of Christ, I may consider it. And you're like, ouch. Ouch. When I meet a Christian who's actually following Jesus, I may consider it. Sometimes our roles as ambassador for Christ, well, sometimes we're not quite all there if we want to all take responsibility for this. And I think we all need to. It's not just them over there or that person over there. It's us. We are the family of Christ. What happens to one of us happens to us all. We take responsibility for all. You know, it sounds like the young Gandhi, early in his life, was searching for an ambassador for Christ, but he didn't find one. Well, Gandhi became an example of deep, committed spirituality for all people of faith, and even Christians as well. He became an ambassador for turning the other cheek, and he was searching for an ambassador for Jesus, yet ironically, he became in many ways a much better ambassador for Christ than many, many Christians. Yet he was thoroughly Hindu. Go figure. Verse 20. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. What does it look like to be an ambassador for Christ? I'm going to give you an extreme example here, but it's an unbelievable example. You remember back in 2006, a little Amish village known as Nickel Mines. You remember that story, don't you? Horrible, horrible events. It's in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I know Brenda and Roy have been through there. I've been through there. Others, I'm sure, have been through there as well. Well, anyway, a deranged man, neighbor from outside of the Amish community, walked into the village's one-room schoolhouse with a gun, took a bunch of kids hostage, and a little while later, you remember 5 girls were dead, shot in a gruesome way. 5 others were wounded, and the gunman himself turned the weapon on himself and committed suicide in an unimaginable trauma. For any community, that is an unimaginable trauma to go through. You would think it would have been especially devastating for a tight-knit, religious, non-violent people like the Amish. And the world, I still remember this, the world watched the Amish people. What were they going to do? I mean, we knew they were religious. We knew they were strong, strong Christians. We knew that they dedicated and devoted their lives to their faith. Obviously, what were they going to do? How were the elders of this radical pacifist community, how would they respond? And what the world saw was beyond belief, really. It's hard to get our minds around their response to what happened. But one of the first things that the Amish did was they immediately reached out to the gunman's widow and children. They brought them food. They brought them food. Food for the family of their children's murderer. They raised money to help them pay their bills. Because on top of everything else, that family lost its principal wage earner, the man who shot these kids. An Amish woman told a reporter, she said, "We have to forgive. We have to forgive him in order for God to forgive us." That's how important she saw this. 10 days after the shooting, they had a bulldozer crash through the walls of that schoolhouse in Nickel Mines. The Amish hired an outsider, a non-Amish contractor, to drive his bulldozer through the building. They wanted the world to see that they were absolutely determined to forgive and to move forward, and quickly. They weren't going to hang on. And if you think about it, looking back on that and looking at our world, sharp contrast to the sort of things we typically see in the news after a tragic murder. And I'm not minimizing anyone's pain. Believe me, I'm not. When someone gets murdered, it's beyond most of our ability to withstand. I realize that. But how many times have we watched on television family members of murder victims sitting in the courtroom day after day, determined to see justice done, obsessed with making sure the perpetrator gets the harshest sentence that is allowed under the law? And they just want closure, they say, and they tell reporters it's their right as crime victims. I mean, honestly, I can't hardly even comment on this. I've never been through it. I understand that. But I'm just merely looking at 2 different kinds of people and how they react to very similar kinds of things. And I'm saying, yes, it's possible. to be an ambassador for Christ, even in the most horrific circumstances in this world. Dale Carnegie said this, and you know Dale Carnegie. He said, any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain. Any fool can do that. And most fools do, he said. But it takes character and self-control to be understanding and forgiving. The Amish idea of closure is evidently very different than most other people in our nation. A pastor from that area told the story of sitting in the kitchen of the gunman's family. Pastor was there ministering a short time after the shooting, and there was a knock at the door of the gunman's family. It was an Amish man. It was a neighbor of them. He said he had to come. He came on behalf of his community. And this burly Amish farmer walked right up to the gunman's father. The gunman's father, he walked right up to this gunman's father. He put his arms around him and held him for an hour. He simply said this, we forgive you. We forgive you. He and his community were as good as their word. They lived up to it. Someone once said, a great man shows his greatness by the way he treats little men. I think it's true. Say any person can show their greatness by the way they treat someone who is their enemy. Verse 18. And all of this is a gift from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ. God has given us the task of reconciling people to him. There are all sorts of ways to be an ambassador for Christ. Once in a great while, there may come an opportunity for a spectacular witness like we just talked about from the Amish people. But more often, what we have in our lives is a multitude of small opportunities to bear witness and to be ambassadors in word and in deed. I remember back in my younger days, took a semester off from college, and I went to work for BJ's Wholesale as a tire changer. And we changed many, many tires, and I think I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that BJ's Wholesale used to do, I don't know if they do it now anymore, they used to try to catch us in lying and stealing from them. So they'd set up a sting. This is what they do. And one particular sting, I was working back in the tire garage, and a woman came back with a tire on a rim that had blown. And she wanted the tire changed to another tire that she had, a brand new one. And so when that happens, we're always supposed to say, well, you really want to get that balanced. And I know it doesn't say that on your slip, you didn't pay for it, I realize that, but you really should balance any tire that you mount on a rim. And of course, there was a charge to balance. And we were instructed to take the money for that balancing way back in the tire garage, and go through the register and account for it, staple the receipt and all that good stuff. That was our job to do that. And so this woman comes back with this tire and her rim, and I say, well, you need to have it balanced. She says, okay. She gives me the money, and I go through the whole rigmarole, and I do all the things that need to be done, and I mount her tire up, send her on her way, and a little while later, my boss comes back, good job, you passed. That was a sting. And you passed. You made it. It wasn't the first time that they tried to sting me when I was working for them. They did it with a lot more money the next time. I'm like, no, I'm not going to take that bait. No, thank you very much. I'm all set with that. Well, my boss knew about my faith. My parents came in to work one day. I don't know why they showed up, but they came in to pick me up, I guess, for some reason. And my boss said to them, yeah, you don't get workers like that very often. And I thought, wow, what a great way just to show what I believe in what I do. And a coworker of mine, well, he took the bait, let's just say, and gone for $6, a $6 balancing charge, gone. Like, no. You know, I think about Roy. He's not here, so I can pick on him today. Roy had some things stolen lately from his studio, and You know, basically you know who did it. But I think out of a greater sense of what's right, he chose not to come down on that person because he wants that person to experience forgiveness somehow. He wants that person to experience Jesus. And Roy can be gruff at times. Come on, Roy can be kind of Roy sometimes. But his actions, in my opinion, speak very loudly for Christ. So does Brenda too. Our manner of life, being good examples of the love of Christ, is vitally important. Yet there's no substitute for offering an explicit verbal invitation to become better acquainted with Jesus. The silent witness, to be sure, is powerful, but sometimes there's no substitute for words. Palm Sunday and Easter will soon be upon us. It's coming. And these are 2 days out of the year when a high percentage of people think, I ought to get back to church. They think about attending worship service of some sort. Maybe they'll make it there on their own, or maybe they won't find a place to go. But one thing would sure help. If an ambassador for Christ invited them to worship service. Hey, say, come with me. Come on, we'll hang out. Or we have this whole online thing now. Invite them to our online embassy here as ambassadors. You certainly have the ability to forward invitations. I send the invitations out to Sunday service. That's easy to forward, isn't it? To people that you know. Share the Facebook post about the service. Hey, check out this on Facebook. If you want, I'll come over and watch it with you. Talk about it afterwards. This is something that we can do. Sharing on Facebook, it's not very hard. And it's not just about getting people into church. There's a higher purpose to it than that. The purpose goes far beyond filling pews or filling numbers on Facebook statistics. That's not really what we're about here. We're about verse 20. That's what we're about. We are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. But are we pleading that to anybody? Are we speaking for Christ? Whether our friends and neighbors or family members make it to worship in the next couple of weeks it's not the point, really, but getting here is just a means to an end. We're inviting them ultimately not to walk into a building or to log on to Facebook. We're inviting them to be reconciled to God. That's what we're inviting them to do. That's why we're doing it. We're inviting them to respond to Jesus' gracious invitation for them to make their way back home after far too much time spent wandering around. That's what we're inviting them to do. And you can be a part of that joyous welcome home that Jesus gives them. You are the ambassador. So speak for Jesus to the people in your world. Would you stand with me for our final hymn today? Final hymn today is I Love to Tell the Story. It's a wonderful old hymn that has been sung by generations with heartfelt praise. We're going to sing verses 1, 2, and 4 of number 322, I Love to Tell the Story. Let's sing it together. Let it be our prayer.
Story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. I love to tell the story because story.